r/pro revenge. My shift supervisor at work was a petty tyrant who treated me like garbage, so I got him fired and arrested. Hi all. I've been on Reddit a long time, but never really had a story, but I stumbled upon this subreddit and I thought I had to share. I work as a computer technician now, but when I was in college, I worked part-time at a well-known chain cafe. Let's call it Seattle's finest. Other than babysitting or odd one-offs under the table work helping at friends' booths at Renaissance fairs, it was my first job. The manager, Eliza, had aspirations for rising in the company at a corporate level, so she was obsessed with making our store the finest, Seattle's finest. At the same time, though, she wasn't an especially effective manager at the store level. She didn't really know how to make all the drinks and had to constantly refer to the recipe cards even though she was supposed to be an expert on everything. She also didn't really care to learn, which meant that during a particularly busy rush, she could never step in and help us out in making drink orders. She would just hole up in her little office in the back near the kitchen. However, she did have a college degree, and our company's policy, at least at the time, was that only college degree holders could be the full manager of a store. So she left the day-to-day running of the store to Steven, the lead shift supervisor who had been working at that location for 25 years since he was 16, and the only reason I'm not a manager is I don't have a college degree. He never got tired of reminding all the workers at the store would go to crap if he wasn't around. Now, Steven didn't really have to do much other than delegate others to do things and make sure orders were sent out to suppliers and to sign those orders in when they arrived. Our store followed standard company practice, and so a fixed amount of supplies was usually ordered in every day, with only slight variations to account for a particular store's needs. For example, we might order 60 chocolate muffins a day, while the company average is 100 because our store was next to a yoga studio and the ladies who came in ordered less of the fattening items. Steve also wrote the schedule every week. When I was hired on, Eliza was the one who interviewed me, and she assured me I'd get at least 20 hours a week, 4-hour shifts, to coincide with my school schedule. And I only work Saturdays on the weekend, not Sundays. During my 2-week training period, she kept her word. I'd hover right around 18 to 22 hours a week, 4.5 hours at a time. After that, however, since I was fully trained, she passed me over to Steven. Steven followed Elisa's pattern for a week or so, but soon enough, he began trying to schedule me in the mornings, which I couldn't do because of school. He'd pretend to get really angry and disappointed and talk about how, in my 25 years with the company, one of the first things you learn is to be a team player. Well, I thought that was great, but I still couldn't work in the morning, so he'd grumble and say, I'll have to talk to Eliza to see what we can do about you. Eliza would occasionally show up to the store. Usually, she was there mid-morning and left well before closing. Steve would always open the store. I've been opening the store for more than 25 years, blah, 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 blah. Steven would try to suck up to the customers and at the same time condescend to us in front of them. Forgive her, she's new. You see what I have to work with? Raw recruits. Sometimes he'd outright call us dumbasses if we couldn't clean things up fast enough or make drinks quickly enough. Like he'd be hanging out in the back counting boxes, meanwhile it's 12 p.m. on a Saturday, and I'm running the register and making all the drinks and our line is 10 deep and he sent over his other worker off to lunch and he himself refuses to help. You've got to have your baptism of fire. He took himself way too seriously. He thought he was special because he spoke fluent Spanish. Since he worked in the morning, a lot of people who had early morning jobs would come in and many of them spoke Spanish only. He thought it was his specialty that he could communicate with them. Well, my father is from Spain and I happen to speak fluent Spanish myself, so one Saturday when I opened the store with him, I started speaking Spanish to one of the customers, and the customer complimented me on how well I spoke the language. Steve looked like he was ready to murder me. Whenever customers would come in who spoke Spanish, rather than let me communicate with them, Steve would get up off his butt and say, I'll handle this. As time went on, Steve would only schedule me for 8 hours a week, like closing Friday night and opening Saturday morning. I thought, whatever, I'll just start applying to other jobs. I didn't tell him that, though. I knew he was giving all the hours to his favorites, usually young women who he tried to flirt with. I know, because he tried the same thing with me at first. He said that he could give me more hours, but I had to play ball. Nothing that I could actually prove in court, but he was hinting that if I go out with him, he would give me more hours. No thanks, man. You're gross and married. Well, Eliza was up for promotion to district manager, which meant she would oversee 5 or 6 of Seattle's finest coffee shops instead of just one. However, in a whole team meeting one special Sunday, she said that our store consistently was losing product. She warned us to stop giving discounts to friends, stop giving away free cookies or snacks to friends, etc., etc. She also said that if we planned to have some sort of pastries ourselves, we were allowed a certain amount of free product depending on the hours we worked. We had to make sure to write it down on the store use board. At least during the hours that I worked, I never witnessed anyone giving away free products, and I certainly wasn't using any of it myself. No one gave stuff away, other than Steve, of course. Steve got a bonus every time the store use board was below a certain threshold, and he would always accuse us of stealing or giving away things. In fact, he said so at the meeting that shrinkage is caused by these rookies who think a company runs on fee-freeze. It's a business based on cold money, and we're bleeding it when we steal product or give it away. Meanwhile, I always noticed Steve giving free discounts to certain customers giving things away. One of those rules for thee, not for me types of things. Another worker actually asked him about it, and he said, managers had certain privileges. Dude, you're not a manager. You make $3 more an hour than me, and you've spent your whole life here. He also resented the fact that most of us who worked in the store were college students who would eventually move on someday to find something hopefully more financially profitable. Steve would do this working class hero bit where he would talk about how college people were snobs, didn't know how to do real work, were lazy, were privileged, etc. He also mocked me for majoring in computing as a female, and accused me of just trying to get my MRS degree. He acted like he was kidding, but he was still really slimy. Then he went back to his homily about how business people's whole day would collapse without people like him to get them started the right way with coffee. I'm as indispensable to a large corporation as the CEO. Meanwhile, we're all thinking, calm down, Steve. You're a shift supervisor at a suburban coffee shop and you wear an apron with your name embroidered on it. You're not curing cancer. But anyway, Eliza's promotion depended on our store reducing its shrinkage. On a date a few days from our Sunday meeting, company bigwigs would come to the store and check out how well Eliza ran things. We were told to look sharp. The bigwigs would be in the dining room chatting with Eliza while the rest of us who were scheduled that day tried to look our best. Steve didn't really have any incentive to make Eliza look good because as long as he kept overall shrinkage beneath a certain number, he would still get his bonus. But that threshold was too high for Eliza to get her promotion. Also, it wasn't as if Steve would become a manager if Eliza got promoted. The company would simply get a new manager as an outside hire. Informally, we'd call Steve assistant manager, but the company did not officially recognize him in this capacity. Since he was a longtime worker and worked full-time, he did get health benefits and a 2-week vacation. The rest of us lowly part-timers just got a store discount and some free food or drink while working. We got paid every 2 weeks, but we got tips every single week. If you've never worked at a coffee shop like Seattle's finest, customers would throw money into a jar at the register if they felt like being generous. The tips would be emptied out every night, and eventually at the end of the week, all the money would be parceled out to all the workers, depending on the hours they worked. Since I only worked a few hours, my tips were small, but at least it paid for laundry. My school starts a couple hours after the store opens, and since I wasn't burning too much energy working, I'd get up nice and early every day. The store was close to my apartment, and I always walked there. It was the time of the year when the moon was still out early in the morning. I decided that I'd walk to the store and get my tips for that week. I approached the store from the alley entrance, but I intended to enter through the front. Store policy was that you could only enter the back way if you were scheduled to work. As usual, at that hour, our daily supply truck was pulling out of the alley, and there was a huge stack of daily supplies and crates outside the back door. Steve propped open the back door with a trash can and was carrying one crate at a time into the store's back room. My first instinct was to help him, but then I remembered that I wasn't being paid, and besides that, Steve was just a total I was fascinated watching him as he worked because usually he was such a lazy I was hidden by cars and trees so he couldn't see me. He stopped working, but there was still a crate left at the back door. It was filled with what looked to be croissants and random boxes of granola bars. In addition to coffee and pastries, our store also sold third-party nutrition bars, the kind where you can buy a box of 6 for $4 at the grocery store, but we charge you $2.99 for just one. He was talking on his cell phone, and only a minute or two later, a beat-up car pulls into the alley. The driver pops the trunk, and Steve puts the crate into the car, and the car speeds off. Steve then goes back into the store. At first, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a work-related thing that I didn't understand because I wasn't a shift supervisor. Maybe the person in the car was from another store and our store was supposed to send those items to them. I decided to forget my tips for the time being and walk back home. By the time I got there, I realized it was mostly that Steve was just a thief. I went to school and forgot about it for a few hours, but every now and then that day, I'd think about it again. The next morning, I woke up and made sure I had my cell phone ready. I waited outside really early, even before the supply truck came, and when it did come, sure enough, Steve did the same song and dance as the day before. He left one crate outside and coordinated with his accomplice on his phone. The same car arrived and it pulled away after Steve packed its trunk with stolen goodies. I thought I was being really slick in recording the scene, but later when I reviewed what I had, it was way too dark and unclear what was going on. And if I tried to get closer to get a better picture or where there was more light, Steve would definitely see me and my cover would be blown. I actually worked that day because it was a Saturday. Steve was his usual douche self, but hearing him banter with customers, it reminded me of other pieces of other conversations I overheard from him over the past many weeks. Steve had a side business, or at least his wife did, selling snacks outside of clubs and sporting events. I put two and two together and realized that if Steve stole even one crate and sold off its items at a massive discount, he'd still make a pretty penny in all of its profit. And he had a stolen crate 2 days in a row. Who knew how many more crates he had stolen in the past? I realized that if I told Eliza, she wouldn't believe me and Steve would definitely deny it. So I had to catch him red-handed. The approach I'd been making to the alley was too far to record him without being observed, but I saw that there was an apartment complex on the other side of the alley. If I could just, somehow get into that apartment complex, all I'd have to do is quietly hold my phone over the brick wall and it would be close enough to record him. And that's precisely what I did. Staking out Steve stealing became my morning ritual for a whole week. Out of 4 days, he stole a crate 3 times, and each time I had him recorded. I wasn't scheduled to come in until an afternoon the next week. Now, all I needed to do was show Eliza my phone and I'd nail this bastard. Unfortunately, she wouldn't be in the store for a while either. But then I remembered that the big company meeting regarding Eliza's promotion was coming up that Monday afternoon, just a couple of days later. I wasn't scheduled to work, but I knew I could talk my way into the back room with an excuse that needed my check. Our back room has a computer where we clock in and out, and it's just one window on the screen. If you click out of it, you have access to the rest of the computer's functions. One thing the computer always has running in the background is what we called Store TV. It was just basically a series of short infomercials about how wonderful Seattle's finest coffee was. How our beans are from plantations where workers are treated humanely, how we donate to underprivileged communities, offer to fund women in STEM, and things like that. The file was stored as a WMV file, and the store just played it on a continuous loop. Every so often, Eliza would obtain a new set of infomercials, and we just loop those out too. Our store had one big screen mounted from the ceiling which faced out into the store away from the registers. My plan, obviously, was to upload my video of Steve stealing onto the store computer. I had the files, which I combined at home into one big file with 3 occasions where you could clearly see his face, and the face of the woman driving the car, who I assume is his wife, and how they are clearly stealing product from the store. Eliza and the big bosses were already there at the restaurant, so the sensible thing would be for me to say, "Excuse me, Eliza," and just brazenly interrupt her meeting with my cell phone video held up to her face. But I love a bit of drama, and Steve had this coming. So I see Eliza with her colleague sitting at a table near the registers where Steve is standing with a eating kiss grin on his face. The store isn't really crowded. Eliza sees me when I come in and in full "I love my staff" mode says, "Oh everyone, here's my associate, one of our newest and best. She's going to college for computing." Followed by a bunch of nods and pretending to give a crap. I smile and mouth the words, "I'm just here to get my tips." "Of course, go get it." And Steve looks like he wants to slap me with his little dick, but too bad, I'm going into the back room, jerkwad. Our tips are placed in little baggies labeled with the amount in our cubbies in the back room with an honor system not to go grabbing anyone else's tips. I grab my tips, $11.50, not bad. But I go straight for the computer. I have my phone's data cable and plug it into the USB port of the store computer. I upload the file. As planned, I unclick the propaganda channel for Seattle's finest and switch it to Steve the Thief and set the video for a continuous loop. I came out into the restaurant and as usual, no one really cares about the TV. I go to Steve and order a hot latte. Steve looks like he wants to stab me in the throat, but he still has the eating grin on his face because the bosses are all there. He doesn't know that just a few feet above his head, there's a continuous loop of him and his wife stealing products in the alley every morning. I had made sure to include a time and date stamp on the videos when editing. He already had some hot milk ready and all he had to do was pull 2 espresso shots. I had my drink in 30 seconds. I pulled out my wallet, but uncharacteristically, he smiled at me and waved me off. Eliza saw me and nodded in approval. Then I sat at a table not far from where the bosses were sitting. Above Steve's head, his video was playing silently. And finally, the payoff. One of the bosses said, "Say, Eliza, that isn't our company video of our donations to minority scholarships. What is that?" Eliza looks at the video, and everyone else looks at the video too, mouths agape. Only Steve is still standing there like a grinning ninny. Finally, Eliza says, "Steve, can you explain what's going on here?" Steve looks at the video and looked for a second like he was going to run out of the room like Usain Bolt. He didn't do or say anything other than run into the back room. Seconds later, the video stopped, and a few moments later, it began playing again. Haha, Steve. I deleted the correct video, made a duplicate of your video, and renamed it as if it were the propaganda channel. Everyone in the dining room was once again treated to a loop of Steve and his wife stealing an entire crate of designer granola bars and pastries repeatedly. One of the big bosses said, "Eliza, let's close the store right now. Young lady, I'm sorry, but..." He pointed me to the door. "Who am I to argue, sir?" I walked home with $11.50, but felt like $1,000,000. A couple of days later, I got a call from corporate thanking me for the information about Steve. No, sorry, they tell me they can't give me details about what happened as it's a police matter. Anyway, as thanks, a week later, I received $200 in-store credit. A few days later, I came in to find neither Eliza nor Steve at the restaurant. One of my coworkers told me that she heard that Steve was arrested for theft, both he and his wife. Eliza got a promotion because it was proven that the only reason her store had moderately high shrinkage was that Steve was stealing. However, because she was supposed to be keeping a close eye on Steve, she's being watched carefully to ensure she's actually a good employee. Well, I guess that's fair. She wasn't a thief, but she should have kept a closer watch on her store. On the whole, getting a full-time salary but only showing up for a few hours a week wasn't acceptable. As for me, the new manager got me my final check because I quit. I went and applied for a job on campus at my school's off-brand coffee shop. Same basic job, a few jerks here and there, though I'm no prize winner myself, just saying, but I did make $1 an hour more. As time went on and I graduated from school, I did eventually learn that Steve was not only stealing products, but also embezzling tips and tampering with the time clock to reduce people's hours and give himself more. He went to jail for 6 years, but his wife got a suspended sentence because they had 2 children under the age of 13. I learned this because the company I work for actually did tech service for Seattle's finest corporate office, where Eliza now works. She remembered me, and over the finest coffee in all of Seattle, she told me the whole story. Story 2. R/Pro Revenge. Crappy bosses, f*** around, find out. I had a job working in a warehouse delivery for a store. The entire corporate structure was built on treating the people below you like crap, and that was passed down through every level. Managers would just bark orders and drop you out for any reason they could think of. They paid about 25 cents over minimum wage, and the bosses drove BMWs and Mercedes. The big boss lived in an $8 million house. Our store was the freight hub for 4 others in the little chain, so we got to know the drivers from the other stores, as they were always coming to load freight or drop stuff off. One day, we're sitting with 2 drivers from another store, and let's call him Buddy remarks that he and his partner are working over 60 hours a week. I say he must be doing okay with all that overtime pay. He says they're not getting OT, just paid a straight time rate. I ask him if he signed an averaging agreement, and he says no. He shows me his pay stub, and there it is. His partner comes back and confirms all this, and they've been doing it for months. He'd asked his manager about OT and had been told that straight pay was just the way it worked. I tell them that's illegal and urge them to take it to labor relations. They're reluctant to rock the boat, figuring they'll just be fired, so I dropped it. We never got any overtime. Our warehouse was busy, but our store was not. A couple of months later, they're in again, and Buddy's partner tells us he and his girlfriend are moving back east, and he's giving his notice. I tell him again to file a complaint, nothing to lose now, so he does. A few weeks go by, and when I come in one day, there are expensive boss cars parked along the loading dock. My workmate says something big is going down. All the managers have been summoned and are inside with a bunch of people in suits. So we wander upstairs to see what's going on. The company bookkeeper had an office in our store and handled all the payroll. He was a Chinese immigrant, a nice guy. The bosses were trying to pin this on him, saying he didn't speak English very well, which was true and had obviously screwed everything up. Turns out he was a pretty cagey guy. He knew what they told him to do was illegal and was able to produce all the records of him telling them that, and of them telling him to basically just shut up and do it. He hands it all over and quits. I see Buddy with a new partner a few weeks later. He's got a pay stub for about 15 paychecks worth of earnings. The company got caught for all the overtime pay and a pretty substantial fine on top of that. Added bonus, the second in command had driven over a nail when he parked his silver BMW on the loading dock and had a flat when he came out of the store. He opened his trunk and called me over and said, "Change that for me." I told him, "Sorry, that's not my job, and if I hurt myself, my compensation claim would be denied." As he went in to call a tow truck, I stood on the loading dock and gazed upon all the havoc I had wrought, and my heart was glad.